move to our concluding session for this year's reset, unlocking capital and partnership to support India's food MSME. Once again, I would like to acknowledge and sincerely thank our thematic partner whose support made Reset 2026 possible. We are grateful to FAO Sapling and World Bank Group for this session. Today's discussion brings together leaders from philanthropy, development finance, impact investing, multilateral institutions, and private sector to explore how we can unlock finance, strengthen partnerships, and build an enabling ecosystem for food MSMEs to grow and scale. Our moderator for this session is Ramanshu Ganguly, partner and lead at Energiva Ventures, where he leads the adaptation and resilience portfolio. With nearly 15 years of experience at the intersection of climate action, food systems, and sustainable development, Ramanshu has collaborated with government, philanthropic organizations, and development partners to design and scale solutions that strengthen resilience while promoting inclusive growth. Please join me in welcoming Ramanshu. Joining Ramanshu on stage is a panel representing diverse perspectives from philanthropy, development finance, multilateral institutions, impact investing, and enterprises support. We have Dr. Shrivalli Krishnan, Deputy Director, Gates Foundation. Dr. Shrivalli leads the agricultural development portfolio for Asia region at the Gates Foundation across delivery, crops R&D, livestock, adaptive and equitable systems. Welcome, Dr. Shrivalli. Our next panelist is Vikas Bali, Chief Executive Officer at Intellicap. As CEO of Intellicap, and he sits on the Group Executive Council of the Avishkar Group, Vikas has over 30 years of experience helping build market-based solutions to development challenges. His work focuses on connecting capital, technology, and entrepreneurship to create scalable impact across agriculture, climate, livelihoods, and financial inclusion. Welcome, Vikas. Next, we have Krishan Singh Rautela, Natural Resources and Agricultural Specialist, Agriculture, Food, Nature and Rural Development Sector Group, India Resident Mission, Asian Development Bank. He leads initiatives on agriculture value chain, farmer-producer organization, digital agriculture, climate resilience, and rural development. With over 30 years of multidisciplinary experience, he brings valuable insights into strengthening agricultural ecosystem through strategic investments and partnership. Please welcome Krishan Singh Rautela. Joining us next is Rajat Sindhu, Program Officer, Oak Foundation. Rajat leads Oak Foundation's work across India and South Asia, focusing on system-level climate action, food energy livelihood systems, and global South collaboration. His work looks at shaping market, strengthening public delivery systems, and building institutional capacity in high vulnerability context. A warm welcome to Rajat. Next is we have Rahul Rai, Managing Director at Infofin India. Rahul brings more than 18 years of private equity investing experience with a strong focus on supporting growth stage food and agriculture enterprises in India. Welcome, Rahul. Joining us virtually is Dr. B.R. Premi, Chief General Manager, National Bank for Agriculture and Rural Development. With more than 3 decades of experience at NABARD, Dr. Premi has played a role in strengthening India's rural finance and agribusiness ecosystem. His work spans across food processing, cold chain infrastructure, post-harvest management, and rural MSME development, including leading the landmark national study on post-harvest losses. Welcome, Dr. B.R. Premi. Thank you all for joining us. With that, I invite our moderator, Ramanshu Ganguly, to take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Mimasa. And over 2 days, there has been a great set of discussions. But I think one thing that really comes up is the importance of food loss, right? Across India, we do see food loss happening across multiple stages of the cycle, be it aggregation, storage, transportation, processing, distribution. Just to put into perspective, around 1/3 of the food that is grown that gets lost, and if we just add a layer of perishable goods, the percentage is a lot more. But what's also interesting is across these loss stages, we do see MSMEs and especially the food MSMEs coming in, and these enterprise, I feel, become the backbone of the entire food systems. They connect to farmers, they connect farmers to the markets. They add a lot of value to the agriculture produce, and I think we have been talking about doubling farmers' income for quite a while, and we do see these MSMEs playing that important connect. They are one of the avenues for creating local jobs, and more importantly, and I think the last panel did point out about the overall the nutritional value that they could bring in by just extending the shelf life of the produce. Yet the problem still remains. These enterprises still are not exactly under the purview of formal finance. Their ability, and perhaps that's coming in from still that apprehension that they still do not make business case, as much business investable case. Although perhaps there's some research which show that the leverage ratios are otherwise. They range from 8 times to 250 times at some cases. But I feel, especially in the context of India, the food MSMEs, they play a very different role, and I think the lens also needs to be looked at as a different. It's not just MSMEs that we are talking about. It's not just about looking at supporting small businesses, but it has a more down the chain value about preserving food, farmer income, security, and overall reducing the waste of resources in India. So I think that's what we would try to achieve in the panel discussion today, where it is not about whether food MSMEs matter, but how do we actually design financial solutions that enable these food systems, food enterprises to scale, become more resilient, and play a much larger role in building a more efficient and sustainable food system. And I think with that, Dr. Premi, I would like to reach out to you. If you can share your perspective on the current state of food MSMEs in India, what kind of financing options and what kind of schemes are available for food MSMEs in India? And perhaps before I just start the discussion, certain house rules that I would request all panelists to keep their interventions to 4 minutes. This last round that we have. Other than Dr. Premi, over to you here.
Good afternoon all distinguished panelists. I thank WRI for inviting me for this particular, I hope I am audible.
Just you are. You're audible, Dr. Premi.
Yeah, so I thank WRI for inviting me for this important session. In fact, MSME, if we talk about, we all know that they are the, secondary pillar of our economy, and more than 7 crore MSMEs are there. Some records, but some records says it is more than 7 crores. Out of that, around that recorded data is around 6.2 crore MSMEs, which is registered under Udyam as well as Udyam Assist portal of Government of India. So their contribution to GAPA or GDP is around 30%, one third they are contributing, and definitely in export also major share is there. But then most of these, especially there is no very authentic data on how much are there in the food sector, especially in agriculture or food sector. In fact, we NABARD has recently decided to go for a systematic study. We will be launching this survey soon. Maybe next 2 months we are going to launch this survey to understand actually different segments of these rural MSMEs which are
primarily into agriculture. So that survey we are going to launch. So actually, if we talk about funding these MSMEs, so there are reports actually. Most of these food processing based or agriculture MSMEs, they face challenges in getting the credit. More than 31%, some surveys shown that more than 30% of them have reported that they are actually not able to access credit. Even NABARD, some of the surveys have shown that many of them are not getting the credit as per their requirement. Though there are private sector guidelines by Reserve Bank of India, 40% of the total actually credit, net bank credit has to go to the private sector. Out of that, actually 7.5% should go to micro MSMEs or micro enterprises, which actually is MSME only. In addition to that, food processing separately provision is there. So food processing is also one of the eligible item under classifying as credit to the priority sector. So, but credit outstanding is hardly 1.98 lakh. If you see the total credit, it's more than 100 lakh crores. So, 1.98 lakh crore only is going to this food processing sector. So that shows that there is lot of demand for the credit. Actually, SIDBI has also done one study where they have assessed the gap in credit. So around 30 lakh crore gap they have assessed in these sectors. So actually, mainly they require credit for working capital, cash credit, then term loan, then they require for infrastructure development or for export facilities are there. Export credit is available. This is the common source of credit. In addition to that, there are many venture capital funds which come which support startups and other entities, and there are various other mechanisms for funding. Then guarantee systems, guarantee is there for getting credit at a reasonable rate. Recently, if we talk about funding these MSME, lot of innovation has taken place because of the this fintech ecosystem which has developed in recent years. Like cash flow based funding is actually now very popular in many of the MSME sectors. Invoice financing through credits very common nowadays. So these were actually dreams earlier, but now they are coming true because of this AI-based funding system. So all these facilities are available. I think only thing is that there are issues, there are challenges. We need to bridge those challenges and bring this new technology, especially artificial intelligence. And on the other side, MSME side, they have to be transparent. They have to actually become formal. That is the main, I think, which I would like to highlight is that they always try to be informal. So since they are informal, banks can't reach them or my banks can't fund them. That is the essence of the entire thing. So I think my initial remarks are these only.
Thanks.
You can take the discussion forward.
No, I think Dr. Premi, that's a very interesting point that you make about the overall formality and the bankability of MSMEs. And that's a critical thing when we look at public finance reaching out to them. But Vikas, I would like to come to you at this point to understand how does the private financing landscape look for MSMEs, especially in India, and also given the work that IntelliCap has been doing across Global South as well. So if you can just shed some light around that, what kind of forms of capital are available, and from your understanding, what kind of gaps do you see in that?
Good evening, everyone, and a very good evening to my fellow panelists. Thanks to WRI for inviting me. Since it's a Friday evening, I'll start on a lighter note. I've been a management consultant for 33 years. So that means that there's nothing left in my right brain and nothing right with my left brain. The question that you ask is very, very complex to answer. I'll start with a very simple point that money has a very strange spirituality. Like water finds its level, money will reach where the returns are the highest. This is the mantra of life. Yeah? So we have to recognize this. After that, once we accept this is when we have to start making some changes in how the private sector views MSMEs, how they finance them and things like that. MSME, yeah? There are multiple words here. And they represent very, very different businesses. Micro, small, medium. Yeah? If I, just to use crude words, right? Micro, 1 crore revenue business, maybe even lesser. Yeah? Medium could be hundreds of crores, right? Their asset base, the collaterals that they can offer is very different from what a micro business can offer. Right? So different segments need to be addressed by different pools of capital. And to that extent, there is a certain progress that has been made in solving the problem. The government certainly has been doing a lot of work in formalizing the food processing sector and providing the 35% subsidy or credit, whatever you want to call that. So at that end of the spectrum, yes, there is a certain degree of availability of capital for the formalization of the micro segment. If you look at the other end of the spectrum, there is enough Silicon Valley type capital available. What do they need? What does Silicon Valley need? Right? Very, very rapidly scalable businesses. Yeah? They are only going after value, not how valuable the products and services of the MSMEs are to the society at large. What creates value? So what creates value is business models, technology, directly to the consumer. Yeah? So make lots of losses and you are even more valuable. If you're running a very small, profitable niche business, you are not valuable. If you make large losses, you are valuable. Right? So that's the Silicon model style of private equity VC funding, which is available to the larger businesses. And certainly they have been taking their share of investments. My sister company, Avishkar Capital, has invested in many agro-based companies, including AgroStars, and Ergos and I&I Farms. We built businesses from almost zero, right? Which is export of pomegranates and bananas to the Western world, or to create e-commerce-based platforms to advisory services to the farming community. So yes, impact investment dollars have also gone into the MSME broadly category. But clearly a lot more needs to be done in order for the bridge to be created. So I'm sure the word missing middle would have been talked about multiple times through the last 2 days, so I'm not going to belabor that. But yes, that is the truth of life, that at the two ends of the spectrum, there are pools of capital available. Premi sir mentioned banks' inability to reach the micro and small segments. Certainly banks will not be able to reach them, and what the banks need will not be offered by the MSMEs in the sector. They are largely independent businesses. 60% of them are informal. 25 lakh is the number that is floated around on the entire number of MSMEs in the food space. So very large, and I think a sector that needs very significant investments from all the stakeholders, including Government of India, particularly linking it to food security and the exports dimension. But I'll take a pause here.
Thanks a lot, Vikas. But Rahul, then I would like to come to you at this stage. How have you looked at the space? You have incubated quite a few MSMEs. Some of them are doing great in the ecosystem right now. So what has been your lens on looking at this MSMEs? What attracted you, and what kind of challenges do you see, or what are the areas that you would feel needs to be flagged early on to understand how should these MSMEs, especially who are trying to work on that the food loss prevention space, how do we need to look at that?
Thank you. So at the outset, I'd say that the problem is really not at the top of the funnel. India has a huge number of agri-entrepreneurs. We have, I think, more than 1.5 million agri-enterprises. The challenge is that only 2% of them account for 70% of value, which shows that we have a long tail with low degree of value addition. And there have been some themes that I felt have resonated across sectors, which have resulted in an inability to scale. One is that the enterprises themselves are not adding enough value. And when we normally speak about value addition, we speak about that a company should be into primary processing and then move into secondary processing. I'm not alluding to that. What I'm referring to is the fact that at the farm level itself, there is not adequate value being created. Just to give you an example of that, let's look at the apple industry in India, the horticulture industry. We grow about 20% grade A apples, 60% are grade B. Right? Every year we see this phenomena of kilometer-long traffic, jams from Srinagar to further down, taking these trucks because they are not stored. Why are they not stored? They're not stored because as a percentage of raw material across grade A apples would be about 15 to 20%. In terms of storage, if you store them for 6 months, grade B would be 30%. Which trader will take a call that, between the harvest price and then the off-season price, there'll be a 40-50% increase in price. So actually a lot of the infrastructure has gone in, but it does not yield results because the underlying economics do not support. So which means that at the farm gate level itself, we need to upgrade the level of productivity and value addition. That is one. Second key factor that I have seen that has held back enterprises is that a lot of people who get into food processing think of it as an engineering problem. It is not an engineering problem, it is an agronomical problem first. One has to look at it as an ecosystem. So it's not about setting up a shiny plant somewhere. Well, guess what? How are you going to get raw material which is at the right price, at the right quality, and enough of it? And that is what inhibits companies from ultimately scaling. So now I think over time also people have understood this as an issue. So people have started investing in the back end, engaging with farmers, FPOs, well before starting up the physical infrastructure of processing or setting up a cold chain. And then the front end also, the market linkages post that. That is also a significant weak factor in several enterprises, that we're growing things which actually the market does not value so much or is a Me Too product. So these two, I think if addressed well, focus on agronomy, value addition, and an integrated approach would result in companies which are much more scalable. And then, as Vikas said, that capital flows to, the point where it's required. It does not need any prodding. It does not need any incentive. It will find its way already.
So thanks. I would really love your point on how we look at these as engineering problems and not an agronomic problem. And I think that's the dilemma that the entire food system, and especially the value addition in the food system spaces, it's still being looked as a technical problem. It's still, the engineering problem does come out. But I feel as, if we are looking at larger investments coming in, there is a need for more evidence synthesis, or maybe when we especially call it an agronomic problem, there is a need for perhaps hedging some of those transition risk. And with that point in mind, Dr. Srivali, I would like to come to you is, what kind of role do you see partnerships playing in this case, especially unlocking finance that could help scale these MSMEs? But how do you see partnerships playing a role? And from your experience, do you see any model that tends to stand out, any example that tends to stand out?
Thank you so much. I would say, to answer your question, I think we first have to look at what is the role across the different types of actors in the entire value chain. If we look at value proposition at every node of that value chain, that is where we see that partnerships should work for each of them. So if we start off from, say, the smallholder farmers, who would be making up 70 to 80% of the farming community in India, they have very small land holdings, which means that even in best case scenario, the marketable surplus at every farmer level is going to be limited. So this is where aggregation models actually makes a lot of sense, because that is where your customer acquisition, for whether it is a primary level processing or an offtake market, makes real value at any aggregation point. And I'm not pointing out to a single aggregation model. It could be a farmer-producer organization, it could be a cooperative, it could be a producer company, it could just be any type of aggregation model that allows for a customer acquisition cost to be lower for the consumer and allows for the smallholder farmer to get and participate in that aggregation model. This is, I think, the first node of the partnership. The second one is when we talk about input as well as output offtake markets. As much as we talk about the output markets where the produce is getting into the primary or secondary level of processing and eventually to the consumer markets, what we often forget is actually the input market has a very critical role. To what Rahul just mentioned, it is an agronomy problem, and an agronomy problem is actually something that we start looking at it from the input side. What types of seed got introduced? What type of inputs, whether it was agrochemical or a biofertilizer or a spray, did that farmer use? Because any quality issue in the input market will actually be reflective in the quality of your produce in the output market. Secondly, as we start looking at integration, and I'm just not talking about integration into Indian markets, I'm talking about if a produce has to meet an export quality, the traceability starting from the input side to all the way into supply chain and logistics is equally important. As India grows towards more and more high value agriculture, more livestock systems, which are growing faster than the staples, we have to acknowledge that we will have to look at newer markets and export opportunities that give higher value proposition for the smallholder farmer. And to do that, we have to look at improving the quality of the produce, which starts from the input and goes all the way to the output. And this is where the partnerships actually play a very important role. A partnership which is public, private, philanthropy, and all the three kind of coming in together in a way that is working towards the value proposition for every node in the value chain. And finally, as we move towards a more middle income economy, you would see more jobs, more revenue being created off farm and less on farm. Because more and more you would need less people to produce, you would need more people to process. And if we understand that transition, I think we will have to make those partnerships work. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Shivali. I think your point on creating, identifying values at every node and then looking at partnerships at that level, that really stands out. And essentially then this becomes a very holistic systems issue, right? Like even to ensure that an MSME is investable, we need to focus backstream. So with that, Krishan, I think my question to you from your experience with the magnet work that you're doing, how have you looked at, you focused on FPOs, you've looked at enterprises playing a major role in it. How did you see these partnerships getting evolved? And
thank you, WRI, for continuing with the tradition of reset. I think it's a very important dialogue for us. And for those who are not aware, the Magnet is Maharashtra Agribusiness Network project. So this is one of the few projects in the country which is actually looking at food loss as one of the outcomes also. And I think that's where we have been connecting with WRI a lot on that. Overall, I think I come from the Agriculture, Food, Nature, Rural Development Division of ADB. So our primary focus is always a farmer. Where it starts, your story of food, if you really see it will start there. And if it starts there, we need to see, is farmer getting what they should get at the end of the day for being part of the value chain? And that's where the income story comes in as to what they can get out of it. And of course, the agriculture's nature is changing because marketable surplus is what you're talking about. Is if you're producing and then trying to market, that's marketable surplus. But if you produce for market, then it's totally commercial kind of agriculture. And I think that's where the shift is needed in India right now, where the farmers have to become producers for a particular market. And that's where their participation in value chain is what needed to be looked at. And of course, the constraints which you're talking about, smallholders, scattered land holdings, and all other externalities of the farming are present there. We tried a different approach. We came from the market in the beginning. We tried to do a PPP approach to this. And we found that that PPP approach also has a problem because the private sector is not fully geared to connect with this market. If you remember this whole organized retail, when they came in, there was a story that farm gate buying will happen, etc., but that did not happen because this ecosystem itself is not very mature. And that's where your story is about, are we producing for market? Are we having the right kind of value in the farm or not? That kind of thing. And there, the whole extension kind of story where it's missing, not just the middle, the bottom itself is missing. At this point of time, we really do not have good knowledge to do that. So our approach initially was to see if we want to do the market story, then what is the produce? Map it. Who is producing? Map it. Market. Then you look at as to what is the current strength of aggregation which you're looking at. And we actually had the first-hand experience to see this whole aggregation pain. Actually, aggregation is on paper that you say you'll get people together, they'll put shareholding, they'll do aggregation and sell it. But ultimately, business runs on other engines also, which is the finance part of it. So we realized that they do have a bit of capital. That's not enough for them to participate. For example, if they want to put a post-harvest infrastructure, there's not enough money. If now they want to just buy and sell, for that also working capital is not there. If the working capital is there, as Dr. Premi is saying, the cost of that, access to that was a problem. So our project actually was designed around these deficiencies to see as to how we can address and looking at the whole value chain also. So I think from Vikas's analogy saying that it flows where, the highest returns are there, we are kind of building dams and building canals to reverse the flow or maybe redirect the flow of the capital to the people where it's needed. So from flood to drought, it should take the water, and that's our approach. And from that point of view, we were able to convince the government, saying that they can create a new vehicle where the finance can flow to these entities by redirecting on two accounts. One was reducing the cost. So reduction of the interest right now has the interest subvention route, which already is quite popular. We took another route where we said the cost of source of fund itself can be reduced or not. So the government is able to give this money to the financing agencies at repo minus 2% at this point of time. What it has done on the ground is agency like Samunati, which is very good FPO focus, are able to reduce their interest rate from 16 to 9.5%, which brings them at par with banks, which also that whole PSI story, right? The tractor at 12%, a car at whatever. So we are able to bridge that gap using this. And we are able to create a product which is targeted for FPOs so that they're able to take this. And we have seen on the ground the result where the turnover is doubled just because of working capital intervention. So from that point of view, we have been, I think, able to get this together. The post-harvest infrastructure, we have been able to make the reach better and the size also to the scale, because another issue will be size. If you invest too low, then also you're not making much of a difference in the market, so you need to get a bigger size, so the FPOs also have to increase their size and scale. I think my time is up, we can add some.
Thanks a lot, Krishan, and I think, a couple of points that you mentioned really, drives home this entire point of how does the working capital essentially trigger that growth side, and essentially then it talks about the different niches of capital that we need to eventually build this case. And Rajat, and I'm sure you get this question a lot, but how do you see where does philanthropic role come in over here? Dr. Srivali did mention about this, the PPP partnership in where philanthropy plays a significant role. And also, the kind of challenges that philanthropy might face working around this issue in India.
Sure. Thank you, Himanshu. This is my grasshopper speech, which I say everywhere, right? So, role of philanthropy. So Shivali's already sort of spoken about kind of the sort of that middle and bottom layer of partnerships. I'll just sort of try and elevate the broader role. See, the core proposition for philanthropy has always been market shaping capital, right? What do we need to do to get more evidence, capabilities, data, and reduce risk for everyone else to come in, right? For the NABARDs of the world, for private capital to come in. That will always be the core proposition for philanthropy no matter what, right? That's like our day job. Something that I've been really thinking about, and this is sort of more, it's the challenges that are coming in are really coming in from, we just live in a very different world right now. It's very different from 10 years ago. Hell, it's very different from just last year, right? We've been funding solutions for a while. And I think the world, the geoeconomics and the geopolitical situation has created a world and in return a market where we need to start looking to design more for paradoxical solutions and not just false certainty. And I'll sort of explain what I mean by this false certainty. We've been sort of designing and proposing that, hey, you need to be responding urgently, but you need to be patient as well. You need to design for scale, but you need to have local ownership. You need to have returns, but need to be inclusive as well, right? I think that's the false certainty that I'm talking about. In a poly-crisis world which we live in, just preserving choices, especially with the MSMEs, right, which is just an incredibly volatile food system, which is linked to the energy system, which is also incredibly volatile, right? Just preserving those choices is probably a great investment outcome for me, right? That's kind of like the design problem that I've been dealing with. And what's the role of philanthropy within that, right? That's probably what philanthropy needs to solve first for everyone else to follow, right? And I think it goes back to Shwali's point on how does partnership work at each of that note, right? And then I think just to conclude, at the end of the day, a great KPI for me and for philanthropy is that, or just catalytic capital in general, is that progressively there is lesser and lesser need for that capital. That's essentially like a good North Star that philanthropy should always hold, right? But again, just sort of ending on the point of this different world that we live in, like how do we design for more paradoxical situations rather than just certainty, right? So not just solutions or not just choices, but give and leave the market with more options so that they can adapt, they can be agile and nimble, and they can do it themselves, right? And it goes across the board. It goes across data, risk, research, solutions, programming, all of it, right? So I think, yeah, that's what I've been struggling with on the challenge and the role of philanthropy.
No, thanks, Rachin. Love your point on the paradoxical solutions. You're right, as we progress, and especially given today's the geopolitical situation, the ever-changing climates, it's important for us to focus on local needs, but have that scalability answer at the same time built out. And I see every layer of capital playing in. And thanks for reiterating the KPI for philanthropy. The sooner philanthropy is moving out, I think that's the better work that philanthropy has been able to do. But on this front, Dr. Premi, I think I'll just move on to you. For the first round brought in the need for a lot of these partnerships coming in at various levels of the value chain, perhaps at various type of organizations or institutions, are talking about. But according to you and NABARD, like what kind of institutional partnership do you feel is going to be critical to perhaps bring in more, finance into the ecosystem or capital into this ecosystem, especially the food focused one?
Thank you. I think I gave a little bit of, in my previous session, I just expressed that there is a large gap in credit. I'm talking about formal credit, I mean credit from the banking sector. So around 30 lakh crore is estimated, maybe, and which is quite huge for 24% of the total credit, which is actually
happening in the country. So though there is this large gap exists, but still people say we are and banks say that we don't have people to fund. I mean, so major challenge actually is basically again which I was talking earlier also, that credit history of the MSMEs. So that because of they don't have any credit history, so or the credit history there is I mean since they are informal sector, so they actually are actually not able to project what they are actually doing, and bank manager is not in a position to decide the case or decide about the funding requirements for this type of entities. So actually now Government of India has come out with a new idea, which is Gramin Credit Score. I think you might have seen in the media and other places. So TransUnion Civil is going to build that kind of score. So this score will have alternative data points which can be captured from these entities. So that at least they have actually some credit history. So this data point could be their sales, or this could be their own UPI transactions, or any kind of data which can be captured. So that is one step, and which will facilitate credit to these entities. Another point which I wanted to highlight is these type of institutions actually they need to be supported initially, maybe through returnable grant kind of products. So like many, we are today, I think a number of philanthropy agencies are there. I mean, representative from philanthropies are there. So actually, I think we can come out with some products. In fact, NABARD has recently decided to go ahead with this type of products where we can give returnable grants. So that these people they actually understand that if I'm using money, somebody's money, I have obligation to return it back. And in the process, we will be able to build a credit history kind of thing. So that kind of partnership between especially philanthropy and the banking institutions or financial institutions and institutions like NABARD, SIDBI, these type of institutions need to be built, so that there is actually a credit history available to the banking sector, so that they are in a position to fund these type of entities. There are a number of other initiatives going on. I think with the interest of time, I may not be able to cover all. But we all know that that 59 minutes loan that from public sector banks. It is a long story. Or I think it has 6-7 years have been over to that experiment is going on. Similarly, now various AI-based mechanisms are coming in various fintechs. They are coming up. So that partnership between fintech and commercial banks or a small finance bank or other banking channels, that need to be made stronger. Though there are certain issues or certain difficulties or certain regulatory aspects in those entities or those mechanisms. But then those only can actually bridge the gap. They can only facilitate more credit to these types of entities. Again, actually, we need to go for for storage or post harvest management. That warehousing receipt system is very important. Actually, it's not picking up to the extent it should have been. So that negotiable warehouse receipt by WDRA, those things need to be actually promoted, so that there is trust building and things are able to happen. And of course, credit guarantee, because these entities need to be funded at either low interest rate, or this is they are having a lot of risk for the bankers. So more and more credit guarantee kinds of instruments should come. Digital platforms already there are, each bank is coming out with their own digital platform where people can directly apply for loans. So that kind of I think on the lines of this UPI, Reserve Bank has launched on portal where people can get credit directly. All banking institutions can onboard on that portal and then give the credit. So that kind of partnership already happening.
to be promoted more. I think those were the 2 points I wanted to make.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Bhimi. I think a lot of interesting pieces that you mentioned about some newer products coming up, the overall, I mean, the credit guarantee products that could come up. But I think one piece, and then again, because I'll allude to you, because you also mentioned a couple of things about there's this large group of MSMEs who are still not ready to avail these products, be it the public finance coming in or even if for the private finance. But how do we strengthen them? What kind of capacities or systems that need to be brought in to get that unfunded group of MSMEs who are perhaps who are perhaps valuable but perhaps not adding that value? How do we, where should we then focus on, and what kind of areas should we focus on there?
Thanks for that, Himanshu. India has done a great job in promoting the startup culture. But we need to shift our focus from startup to scale up. So all the micro enterprises who are creating opportunity for where people are rather than pulling them into the metros and saying, now find work here. They need to scale up. If they're employing 2 people, 3 people, what can we do to make them employ 4 people, 5 people, 6 people, 7 people, and things like that. So I think in the food domain, there are 3 things that I would leave behind for all of us to think about. The first is that we need to give a very clear signal that India is going to become a significant player in exporting food. What that will do? That will then spur entrepreneurial energies to say, okay, the agriculture space needs to be organized. And as Dr. Shrivalli put it very beautifully, a value chain needs to be created end to end. That's when the entrepreneurial energies will really spur. What do we need to do now in order to deliver to this promise of saying we want to scale up our exports from agriculture? It will create a lot of aggregation models that were again spoken about in the panel. People will start coming together. Agri-infrastructure companies will start getting formed. What will these agri-infrastructure companies do? They will provide shared infrastructure, be it drones, be it solar pumps, be it irrigation equipment, etc., to the smallholders. So you will start aggregating, you will start formalizing the entire chain with a very clear demand signal. A lot of private enterprise will come in when they know the rules of the game are very clear, when there are standardized contracts available, when all partners are de-risked to whatever extent it can be done. That's on the one side that we will need to make clear statement of intent on the demand side and then organize the value chain such that they will deliver to that promise. The other is, again, Dr. Shrivalli mentioned PPP, the role of philanthropic capital in this entire space is absolutely critical. It takes a village to raise an entrepreneur. That's the kind of effort that will take for us to be able to scale our economy to the next stage, to provide the livelihoods, to provide the employment opportunities, to grow our economy. It's not going to happen on its own now. With the way the artificial intelligence havoc is going to play itself out, with all the white-collar jobs disappearing, what happened to the blue-collar workers is now going to happen to the white-collar workers. Right? So there's a tremendous change which is happening in society, and we need to organize for that. Right? So scaling up the micro, small, medium enterprises through the role that the philanthropies play in aggregating them, providing them the right kind of technical assistance so that they can scale up their revenues and get ready for attracting commercial debt, concessional debt, commercial capital is a very, very crucial process. Dr. Premi spoke about returnable grants. Our institution has been working in Africa across 8 or 9 countries where we've been working specifically in the nutritious food space. We've identified 20 odd entrepreneurs across 8, 9 countries. We provided them with a returnable grant. That returnable grant has come back. On the back of the returnable grant, they have raised commercial debt and equity. Wow. That's morning. Is that time to sleep or to get up? But so life is the art of the possible. These things can play themselves out provided we come together as private sector, as public sector, as philanthropies, and stitch these entire chains into very, very seamless value chains. But my time's up, as is clear.
Thanks, thanks, Vikas. Rajat, I think I'll ask you. You mentioned something in the when in your last remark as well, and I feel that's something that plagues the sector quite a bit. We often end up funding solutions, and I think it has largely been a solution-led approach. But do you think that's an approach that needs to be adopted? Because what is your take on this? Like, should we have an instrument, a financial instrument, or a technology solution, and that gets backed up, or what kind of lens should we take on it? Especially if we are trying to create a value chain of shift over here.
I think more than solutions or instruments or tech, I think first we need to look at some sort of a platform to aggregate this value chain that we're talking about, right? Like, and for example, I'm looking at Reset. Can something like Reset be a platform where you not just have aggregated pipeline and aggregated shared evidence and shared risk and shared first loss systems, but do you have a pathway for MSMEs to involve, right? Can they go from informal to more built capabilities to more investable to more scalable? Exactly, I think the point that Vikas was mentioning, right? Like, how do we go and push that scale lever, and what does that pathway or that graduation pathway look like? That needs to sit somewhere in some sort of a platform. So that, I think, is first, and then you look at, okay, what kind of equity do I need? Do I need philanthropic capital to reduce risk and reduce or generate evidence? Do I need returnable loans? Do I need some investors to come in? What does government program integration look like? I think all of that are just sort of like the spokes that you add on top, but that graduation pathway is still missing, and somehow the food MSME sector kind of like sits outside the broader food ecosystem that India is rely on, and it's complex, right? Like, probably the most complex that we'll face anywhere in the world. It's India's food system is the biggest, the most complex solutions, and complex solutions will require a little bit of that, both the tinkering of these solutions, but also my initial point, just the flexibility to leave choices on the table for everyone else to make, right? Because if you define them in a box of respond now, don't really have time for patient capital, then that story is lost. If you define them in scale now, but be inclusive as well, but generate profits as well, I think you'll lose the plot very quickly. And I think that's where some of the smaller MSMEs and the informal MSMEs just lose out very quickly, right? Which is why the tail's so long, right? Like, the meat never comes to the fore because we don't have that graduation pathway. We've done this in the, if I'm not wrong, on the poverty spectrum. Like, we have that graduation pathway both from the ecosystem and the civil society, but also from the government, right? That graduation pathway, I think, somewhere is still missing. And where does it house, where does it rest in terms of platformization? I think that's also something, I don't know, like a Reset kind of a platform could do that job for sure.
Thanks for bringing up that entire graduation approach. And I think what I hear commonly coming up across our discussion today are definitely the elements of partnership, the elements of this entire systemic shift. Krishan, I think I'll reach out to you over here in your case in Maharashtra and overall in your experience. Like, if we have to adopt such a graduation pathway, I know it's difficult, but this graduation pathway involves, right, from philanthropies, DFIs, government, private sector, and everybody. Uh, where should that, joint approach of, where should that investment pathway, where does that start from? Where should they start investing jointly?
So, if you really look at the structure the way we have currently, where the partial matching grants, etc., are given, and that is also not only in our project. MOFP does it. A lot of other projects do that, and that's the way where I think the public and private investments meet without looking into a PPP kind of structure, but that actually is kind of leveraging public money to bring private sector, and of course, de-risking private sector is also another role of the public finance which we are trying to do, and of course, the guarantee and things like that will come, but overall, what we should not miss is looking at the integrated the value chain approach and look at as to how each of those actors are given a synchronized support. If you don't do that, then what happens, one part of the value chain might grow to a level, but again, then it will saturate at some point of time. And then other people who are part of the value chain will slowly move away from that because they are not getting enough out of it. So overall, looking at value chain approach for every business instead of just looking at area-based approach, looking at what the market needs and growing for that particular market, investing more into it. I mean, for us also, if you look, Magnet is one project, but we have, for example, Clean Plant program, which looks at this whole issue as to what is the quality of produce we are actually going to get. That depends on what kind of planting material you actually bought. And if a planting material does not true to type, which says that if I'm going to get 40 tons per hectare, instead of that you buy something with that promise you get 20 tons per hectare, people are going to move away from that next season, right? So that ecosystem doesn't exist in the country right now, which says that these are certified materials. For the seed, it may exist to a certain extent, but for horticulture, it doesn't. So you need to invest into that area also. But at the same time, then you need to look at the whole financing part of it, where we are trying to make a difference that the financing entities are able to see them as valuable clients, helping them to develop this whole transaction history, as we talked about. That can come from philanthropy, that can come from other de-risking kind of structures. So that has to happen. So in fact, for us, we are not looking at any project only on one part of the value chain, even if, let's say, Magnet works on one particular entity which looks at marketing, but we are looking at the other side of it. So overall, for us, rural economy in a way. So from, let's say, this particular part, next story would be looking at the whole of the rural economy, where agriculture or allied sector, non-farm, all of that, if you bring that together, then only the rural areas are actually going to thrive. Otherwise, there will be, like in our mountain area, I come from Uttarakhand, Himachal, what is the story? People have moved out, ghost villages, right? How much of area is lying unproductive today? Just look at that, degraded land which you have, how much area is available for us. So it's first that we need to really concentrate in the production area. If you want to be in food, you have to be in rural area. Urban food story is there, but rural economy, focus on that, and then bring all kind of synchronized efforts. That's my suggestion.
Thanks, Krishan. And really like your point on how do we, bringing in one anchor indicator. Dr. Shivali, my question to you then on that front would be around, so if we start talking about these partnerships, if we start talking about these integrated engagement of different sectors, while this sounds really exciting, while this sounds really needed, it often becomes very difficult to have these partnerships up and running and sustained. So in that case, how do we incentivize these partnerships to carry on? What should we bear in mind if we have to look at these kind of partnerships, be it philanthropy, be it public, from people to public to philanthropy and private sector, everybody coming in across this entire graduation that we're looking at, this entire value chain nodes that we're looking at. How do we incentivize these different layers of partnerships?
So I think I'll just take a little bit of step back into, when we talk about unlocking financing across the value chain, I think we have to look at some innovative financing instruments as well, which can actually offer a lot of value proposition and help in sustainability. Dr. Premi spoke about returnable grants, but there can be others like credit guarantees, they can be volume guarantees, they can be blended finance instruments that actually can bring in different types of capital together. So, for example, when we talk about public-private philanthropy and people, and to make sure that it adds an incentive value for everyone, philanthropy mostly is in the form of grants. But can you use that grants innovatively? Can you actually use that to blend capital from international financial institutions like the World Bank or ADB or others to actually make that blended in a way that it reduces the cost of capital? For the MSME or the PACs or the FPOs in whichever form or format, basically don't use philanthropic capital as grants. Use that to blend and really help in reducing the cost of capital that gets into creating sustainable as well as productive assets. I think that would be an innovative solution that adds actually incentive into different structures. The other one that I spoke about is like, credit guarantees. A lot of the financial institutions can actually access lower capital if you get into a credit guarantee. And similarly, a lot of the PACs or the FPOs can get lower cost capital if you get the credit guarantee. I don't think we have in our country a system where philanthropic capital can be blended with public and international capital to really lower the cost of capital for, say, the FPOs or PACs. I don't think the structure exists. And frankly, that would be a game changer, because if your credit guarantee can lower the cost of capital, then that capital becomes available to the end user. I can give you an example we worked on. So a few years back, we put in a blended finance structure with IFC, wherein the Gates Foundation guaranteed a first loss guarantee for IFC. It sounds weird, but we actually provided a first loss guarantee to IFC to invest in Omnivore, to invest in a startup. Now, how did that work? Was basically we put in grant, we treated it as grant, but it was treated as a credit, as a first loss guarantee by IFC, who unlocked 5 times the amount of capital to be invested into Omnivore, which was a VC fund, which unlocked 10x of the capital to be invested into a startups, and these were all agri-tech startups in India. And because Omnivore was coming with an IFC in the system, everyone else followed. So how can we create those innovative financing structures? Use the philanthropic capital very judiciously, but use it innovatively. Have we got a system where we can actually come in as philanthropic capital? We treat it as a grant, but you could treat it as a guarantee, you could treat it as a first loss guarantee, blended finance, first loss, or volume guarantee, in whichever form and format. We could, if the government of India allows, philanthropic capital can guarantee for the likes of NABARD or any other financial institutions to provide that for NBFCs, who in turn can provide that to FPOs or PACs. If we actually unlock that, you can actually make this really work.
I think that's a brilliant point that you make here. Rahul, what is your take on this? How do you look at these? Dr. Srivali mentioned the different forms of innovative financing instruments coming in. How do you see their role playing, helping these startups or these MSMEs scale into the covering that entire journey from micro to the medium scale enterprises? How do you see these kind of instruments coming and helping?
Yeah. So I think this is very, very important. And this approach of looking at value chain end to end, mapping all the potential points of failure, addressing them, de-risking them, and then providing financing amongst others as solutions. It's not just finance, it's a bunch of other solutions and interventions that are required. And everything else kind of takes care of itself. And I really believe that, especially for our country, because in India, everybody is entrepreneurial. The farmer is entrepreneurial, the transporter is entrepreneurial. So as and when an economic activity presents itself, there will be takers for that. Blended finance is very important as part of this entire offering. But my only reservation with respect to blended finance today is, the so-called pain to gain ratio is extremely adverse. It is not really scalable. There are a lot of small, projects that are set up, but nothing at a very large scale. So I think practitioners of blended finance really need to figure out how to unlock $500 million, 1 billion, 2 billion. Your capital of that type of quantum, there are too many examples of 50 to 100 million type of a range. So it doesn't really move the needle. The other dimension where I do feel significant innovation is required, particularly for this segment, is around working capital finance access, especially for micro enterprises. As I see, people graduating from the micro to, small, medium, the key issue from from the micro to small is actually access to working capital. On that side, there are a lot of alternate credit scoring models that are coming up, including using AI and other data sets that are available. So there needs to be a specific push in making sure that those type of models are scaled up. And the credit is brought to that segment. And then for capital, fixed capital requirements, so capex, I think there needs to be much more focus on cluster-based approaches, shared infrastructure. So in the food park type of a program or a mini version of that, so that people who are at this micro segment do not need to invest in these. And because what typically ends up happening is the type of infrastructure that they can create is suboptimal at that level of scale. It is inefficient, it is unproductive, you don't get the right quality, and as a result, most of these entities are almost by design not going to be able to graduate to the small segment. As they graduate, then access to finance for solutions around capex, private equity, venture capital, all of those will start flowing in. So the two key dimensions that I feel require intervention, one at the systemic level, and also including blended finance structures at scale, and second, a systematic approach to working capital, which includes alternate credit mechanisms.
Thanks a lot, Rahul. I would like to open up this discussion to the audience now. If there are audience questions, maybe we can take 2 questions at a time, and then.
Anything about climate finance you could kindly mention?
So, do you have the question to a particular panelist, or is it for?
Anybody can.
So, especially this particular sector, we all realized that there are 3 partners sitting here right now. 4th partner, NABARD, is on the other side. We have had this discussion a long time that climate finance in the agriculture and nature and rural development sector is close to zero. And how do we get more of that happening? And for that only we decided to come up with a partnership where we can design an instrument wherein we can increase the reach of the finance to the private sector investments. Of course, the entities like us, when we want to finance, we finance sovereign and non-sovereign both, but non-sovereign very higher level of kind of transactions. So for us, the reach was difficult to, like as you mentioned, $50 to $20 million kind of thing. But the NABARD actually has very good reach. So we, three of us and partner NABARD are trying to come up with an instrument where we can also bring concessional financing from Green Climate Fund, etc., to reduce the cost of funds so that it becomes a viable instrument and get into financing deals which are currently, of course, in the realm of what the Green Climate Finance does with respect to mitigation, but bringing adaptation also. And from that vehicle, we need to jump to the next as to where adaptation becomes the key force which you can finance, find more money for it. Thank you.
Hi, this is Chevy. I'm co-founder of a company called Yotu, where we are working on sustainable truck refrigeration units for cold chain vehicles and making it like diesel-free and vehicle independent. One of the challenge we face right now with the solution being coming with a battery pack and all, it increases the capital expenditure that is needed to initially invest, even though the ROIs come in the operating cost. But that is where we are not able to tap the customers who don't have access to credits, which belongs all the small business owners and farmers, even though demand is coming from all the quick commerce to use those trucks. But how do you think that we can avail such benefits to the customers so that they can get the license to deliver to big companies and get best price for their products?
On the public finance side, the magnet project which we mentioned, it does have a component where the whole of the cold chain solution, including the reefer trucks and the smaller reefer vehicles also have been already given space. So for example, if FPO wants to create a cold storage, they can buy this kind of vehicle also. Now issues aggregating this demand together and probably bringing people like you. And on the other side also, we are looking at as to how we can make them more common. For example, this climate finance which you're talking about in NABARD, here also there's a room for the EVs in the rural areas, all kind of EVs, we can look at that. So, of course, I think it will take a little bit of time for the NABARD thing to come, but Maharashtra Agribusiness Network, you can look at it. We are doing additional financing, which is scaling up the project. And there recently, when we met the minister, he was really concerned about bringing the logistics and the EV story together and how we can bring it to the individual rural entrepreneurship level also, where you can bring those people to buy this kind of vehicle and become part of the value chain, which then connects local short value chains and also connect with a larger network of hub and spoke. I hope that answers.
Sure.
In addition to that, what you could also explore is working in partnership with an NBFC in which you have a programmatic solution, which includes a few things for the NBFC. You will support them for refurbishment of the vehicle in case it is repossessed. So it's basically an instrument to provide finance to your customers, but with a certain support coming from you. So you know there's a certain quality and all of that that you will demonstrate to them. There's a ROI which you will demonstrate that is that your customer can generate, so it becomes a viable investment for him or her. But in case something goes wrong, you will help in liquidation of that a particular asset, and you could, if you can then do enough number of these as possible to securitize these, create pooling vehicles, sell those assets also for the NBFC, to another bank. So these parallels have happened in the EV space, in the commercial EV space significantly, and similar things could happen here as well. The second thing could ultimately be a lease type of operation, but which would then entail that you would then need to end up becoming a financer, which is maybe not then your core business. So it could be a solution which is halfway there, that you start with a lease, but then you actually work with the banking partner to then sell down those loans and take them off your book.
Yeah, even we tried with leasing, they also checked out like the background of the companies. We are able to get it for the bigger companies, but for small business owners, it becomes a challenge again. So got it, but we'll definitely look with NBFCs for this.
Any more questions? Yeah, gentlemen.
Sir, I am Manoj Kumar, Director in Farmer Producer Company in Rajasthan. We work for organic cotton and quinoa. So I have seen with the FPO and the blended finance and philanthropy, I have seen the problem majorly that they come as a handholding organization. Like initially they will work CBBOs, we have seen with the FPOs. And as soon as they get out of the time period, they are make essential in the schemes and everything. The, the, the product and the structure comes to zero mostly. And it doesn't sustain. Isn't that a failure of the scheme everywhere, the philanthropy also? Like they introduce to the new things, then as soon as the sport goes out, we can't afford that thing. And again it goes to zero, and that also kills the motivation, enthusiasm for the certain new things. If any new person came, then by the changing name, the changing the scheme, then there is a negativity already in the ecosystem that फिर आ गया यार 4 पैसे बना के 2 साल बाद जाएगा, so that kind of thing. I have seen that negativity in the villages, sir, that for the introduction of the pesticide level, new crop diversification, everything we can see with that. So NABARD, especially if NABARD person answer.
So I think problems lies in both sides actually. So actually what happens, FPOs, we have a lot of experience for a long time we have been supporting. So we have all categories of FPOs starting from C, D, B, A, like that 4 categories we have. So we classify based on their performance, more than 7,000 we have done. So actually see, FPO should work with certain principles. I think first and foremost is trust, which which is lacking because what happens, I think people they have not understood the crux of it. So it is basically aggregation model, and it is basically aggregation of services as well as both side. I mean procurement side or the market side. People need to come together and then work together. But that is not happening. So what is happening is basically initially when the grant is going, that facilitation support is being provided by Government of India or NABARD, whatever agencies are there. So till such time things will move. But once that grant is over, because grant cannot be unsustainable. Nobody has that money has some limits. It cannot be given unsustainable manner. So we can any institution, whether government or any institution, they can fund maybe for 3 years or maximum 4 years, not more than that. But then by that time, that institution has to become self-sustainable. That sustainability aspect is lacking in many of the FPOs because of several reasons. So there are a lot of studies. I think we should not discuss all those things. But yes, this credit-based approach, I think we are focusing now that any FPO we have launched the accelerator also. FPO accelerator in some of the states we are working on that. How to accelerate them, how to make them professional entities. It should not be like any other government scheme that okay, some money government is giving, so till such time some funds is there, so institution will run, and after that it will wind up some new institution, what our gentleman was telling. So now we are actually taking another approach where we will actually identify good working FPOs, work with them, scale them up, and make them self-sustainable. And there are good examples. I think number of examples are there. I need not explain. Each state there will be few failures, few successes. So this is one initiative, and I think entire panel was of the opinion that aggregation is the only solution in India, because unless we go for aggregation, shared services, nothing can happen in India. So things will remain as such. And lot of potential India carries actually. We are having largest land. We have largest so many benefits in agriculture. But then I think farm mechanization and so many other issues need to be addressed. It's not I think we are just like thinking that FPO and not much is happening. It's not like that. There are many good FPOs also. I think Gopaya answered the gentleman's question because answering this question is not that easy.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Premi. Maybe we'll just take one more question. Somebody at the back had.
Hi to the panelists. So I work mostly with the organizations in the development sector. So I have a question from the Dr. Shivalli from Gates Foundation. So you double down on the returnable grants to the MSME and the for-profit kind of sector, but how will that plan out in the development sector? Like how they will get like to the first loss guarantee, because the beneficiaries are very different there and they are like creating that impact. So that is.
I think the development sector should work its way out of the business. We don't need the development sector if we are developing or we are developed economies. You don't have development sector operating in countries where the agriculture has transformed itself from subsistence to something that's like an industrialized economy. So technically the capital should actually flow in to the real end user instead of going through these structures. So what I shared was actually look at the structure that we set up with IFC. Why should the capital go to IFC? I mean, if we had a structure in India, it could just go into the structure in India. If RBI allows for philanthropies, and I was just chatting with Vikas, that think of it if that domestic philanthropies capital is unlocked to provide credit guarantee, look at the quantum of resources that would be unlocked. It is exorbitant. And imagine that if can be used to blend with the public capital, the amount of capital that you would generate at an affordable cost is tremendous. We don't need the development sector there.
So thanks a lot. I would like to thank the panelists for their inputs. Dr. Premi, really sorry that you could not be here in person, but it was a great discussion. A lot of insights, even for me, from this entire piece. Thanks a lot for the audience. To stay back on the. Yes, Dr. Premi.
Thank all panelists. I think that was a great panel. I like the panel, and it's really wonderful to speak on the subject. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks the audience for staying back on a Friday evening, and with this I'll hand it over to you, Mimamsa.
Thank you, Romanshu, for moderating such an insightful discussion. And a sincere thank you to all our esteemed panelists for sharing your time, expertise, and perspective with us today. May I request Drishti and Shweta to present a token of appreciation to our moderator and panelist, and would also request all our panelists and moderator to join us at the front for group photograph. Thank you. Invite Dr. Ruchika Singh, Executive Program Director, Food, Land and Water, WRI India, for concluding remarks.
Hi, everyone. Last session of the day and the closing remarks, always the difficult one. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you, for the patiently actually being here, part of the multiple discussions. It's been fantastic 2 days for us. When we started sort of yesterday, I mean, a few cute takeaways. I'm not going to talk about everything because we will come back with a, proper report back. When the conversation started, typically in India, when we talk about food systems, there's a lot more conversations around agriculture or production sort of systems and what needs to be done that, continues to happen. But we don't talk enough about what happens post-harvest, what kind of investments are needed, how do we bring attention to that topic. And there was a consensus, and from the beginning when we started having this conversation yesterday, that yes, that is something we need to do. How do we do that? And very, very sort of interesting things and key takeaways for me. One of the big things that came out was we need to think about what the value proposition is. And this is for us as ecosystem. We are all champions, right? I mean, it's not just what WRI India does, but all of us as champions, especially methane, and those are very huge impacts. But we need to think about these in terms of, for different stakeholders, sometimes the value proposition differs. The other sort of important piece was when we think about behavioral change. Typically, I mean, India culturally, we've been saying a lot that, we like feeding people, we are very open, but I think we are also the second largest food waste generator if we look at UNEP statistics. So we really do need to create a different kind of awareness on or behavioral change, how we think about that in terms of reducing food loss and waste. And this is, how do we think about behavioral change as a value and what needs to be done, or awareness, how we think about that. Innovation was another topic that was well discussed. We have fantastic sort of, our champions who've showcased, innovations through yesterday and today. The question that came up on innovations more was also how we are thinking about demand-driven innovations. For instance, innovations, are they meeting farmer requirements? And are they getting the investments that they need? How do we sort of really work, create some of these small steps for reducing food waste or loss and interventions that can really help in that. Trust was a big one that came up. I mean, it's about food safety. We're talking about some of these innovations. How do we also build trust? And that as a value becomes critical. And I think in the last session, one of the speakers, I think Vikas, you were talking about, I mean, the value, for instance, for depending on who is putting the capital, they're looking at different kind of things, right? I mean, for some of the bigger venture capitals is the business models and innovations that will. But we also need to think about, for these different sources of capital, how do we then bring, consensus on that? So a lot more, lot on values. The other sort of, and that's a sticky kind of issue, right? We need to think about trade-offs when we think about food loss or food waste. Sometimes the innovations which we are thinking of, for instance, called supply chains, there are also emissions associated with it. And I think FAO had kind of, brought out the tension very, very nicely, Mr. Hagiwara, that how do we think about some of those issues? So let's also think about any of these innovations in the context of, what's happening around that. That becomes important. And the last sort of just on the high level takeaways, we need a lot more sense of urgency in terms of, food loss and waste is happening now. But are we, within the ecosystem, there isn't enough sort of urgency on how to do that. So how do we look at some of that? On specifically, topically, the 2 days, yesterday was primarily more conversations around food loss and a lot more, much more nuanced discussions around when we are thinking about pilots, but how do we scale those pilots? We heard a lot about different innovations. There's a lot of fragmentation also that we are seeing. So how do we build some of that together becomes important, and how can we also converge then funding, but also agri-business innovations, for instance, and finance that might flow into the sector becomes important, especially in context of climate variability that we are seeing, because the losses can, and we know, will be higher depending on different sort of climate impacts, including heat, which is an important one, which, till last week, I think a lot of, most of India was facing. Currently, we're seeing a lot more around rains, at least in northern India. So that changes. Food waste, similarly, very, very interesting conversations, how we think about strategies. For HoReCa, it would look different from when we think about, what city governments can do. We launched the GHG emission tool, which really came from the ask from city governments itself, which is quite heartening. And, we've been working in a couple of cities, Pune and Indore, and the cities were like, we need to really measure where the emissions are. Can you help us with that? And that led us to, the tools. And now I think there'll be much more forward-looking conversations with we were discussing earlier this morning in terms of how some of this tool can be actually scaled up also maybe with the SWM, I mean, the new guidelines are there. How do we sort of, streamline some of that? One sort of, on the shifting the narrative piece, and on the food waste side, this is an important one. And we keep hearing a lot more focus on waste to wealth, or what happens post, valorization, essentially. And one of the questions we've been asking is, where should one sort of look at? Waste to wealth is, of course, important. But most of the panelists, and one of the conversations that we heard constantly was, reducing at source still is the more important sort of intervention rather than sort of, pushing a lot of these investments towards waste to wealth kind of solutions. So how do we see a balance of that? Because we are also moving our ecosystem in a certain direction, right? So we need to sort of think of that. So overall, I think in terms of enabling conditions, we really need to think through in terms of how we have policies that are fit for purpose, and we know that, a lot of that are not, we're not fully there yet. In the agriculture sector side, we still have. How do we get that for post-harvest management? Also on the food waste side becomes important. It was really heartening to see here that Bureau of Indian Standards was talking about the standard on food loss and food waste is going to come out later this year, which actually motivates then businesses to really start thinking through for their work and supply chains much more sort of systematically. And a lot of businesses who were part of the conversations yesterday and today were also talking about how they would like to see more this as part of their operational sort of guidelines. Because if it's just like a side project, it doesn't really work. So the economics becomes important from the business side. And the last big sort of topic that was discussed on the finance, but very important one. And then the only thing, and because we just discussed that, different stacks of capital are needed. But how do we sort of really use philanthropic capital, which can be catalytic, to de-risk some of the innovations? Where can public finance play a role? We know public finance, currently is, in terms of funding for instance, post-harvest losses, etc., there's a lot happening. But how do MDBs, philanthropy come together really to sort of collaborate and create these different instruments become critical. So it's been fantastic. That some of these on the finance side, enabling conditions side, the value propositions were my key takeaways. And I'd like to thank you, all of you again, for being a fantastic sort of, audience and participants and speakers. And I'll pass it back to my colleague, Memansha. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. And with that, we end our Reset 2026. Have a good evening and have a safe journey back home. Thank you.